Alright, good morning. It's a cold day here in Ohio, but I'm going to be doing a little comparison review this morning. We're going to be looking at the SumoSprings from the SumoSprings company, and we've got Timbren, the rear bumper shocks here. They're basically a very similar product. They both do it in a slightly different way. With the SumoSprings, it's a kind of like a really dense urethane foam. It's supposed to be resistant to all weather and road conditions, etc. These are, when you try to compress them, they're really hard to compress. So it's not like rubber. It's kind of interesting. Versus the Timbren springs, which are just more of a hard rubber. Once again, you can't really compress it with your fingers. Both of these are engineered to provide extra support on your truck when you're under load, and only when you're under load. And I'm going to be installing whichever ones I like more on my 2011 F250. And the reason I'm upgrading the rear suspension is because I have a truck camper now that I'm going to be hauling, and both of these are not only supposed to increase or decrease the amount of squat in the rear, which subsequently brings up the front of your truck, but they are also supposed to give you a much more stable, secure ride. And they're both progressive rate springs, so the more weight that's on them, the more force they put back, or the more steadiness that they provide. So I went ahead and I first bought the SumoSprings from the SumoSprings company, and I bought part number SSR-114-54, and that is correct for the 99 to 2016 Super Duty. As you can see right here, 2x4 and 4x4. So they sent me this, and on the diagram, very easy to install. Basically, you just remove the factory jounce bumper and install this in its place. And in theory, that would be pretty easy, except the factory jounce bumper, as you can see here, didn't want to come out easily. And I'll show you how this works here. If we go around to the side of the truck, you look under the truck on the frame in the wheel well, this would normally sit right here, and only when the truck would be severely overloaded, this rubber isolator would make contact with the little foot that sticks out on the axle, just to keep the suspension from bottoming out and causing damage with metal-to-metal contact. There's just a 15mm nut that is on top of the frame on the inside, and you can try putting some PV Blaster penetrant on there and letting it soak and taking it off. The problem I had was, even though my truck spent most of its life in Texas and there's really no rust, the bolt or the nut was severely rusted onto the bolt, and I was able to get it to turn, but even with an impact, this whole thing would just spin. And I tried to put a pipe wrench on this and everything else, and it was just being a real big pain in the butt. So I just ended up taking a cutoff wheel and sticking it in between here and just hacking the thing off, because it's not like we're going to be reusing this. So that worked a lot easier. Might save you some aggravation too if you just cut the thing off with a like a Sawzall or a cutoff wheel. Alright, so thinking, okay, so I bought these first, and I did a lot of reading between the two. There's not a ton of information out there except from the manufacturers, especially related specifically to my Ford F250, but you can see that there's some noticeable differences. So if you take this one, you stand them next to each other, the SumoSpring is a little bit higher. What that means is that it will make contact quicker with the factory suspension. And that could be good or bad, depending on the spring you get. The yellow ones are their strongest, which means they can withstand the most weight. The SumoSprings also come with a spacer if you want it to be essentially in constant contact, which with the spacer installed, these things would basically be touching that little stop all the time. May even lift the rear end of your truck up just a hair. The problem with that is that would create an extremely harsh ride. Basically, it wouldn't even let your leaf springs do anything. So going down, you know, like a road with potholes, the rear end of your truck would just be bouncing all over the place and pretty rough. So there is a place for that, though. If you're constantly towing a heavy load, you may want to put that on there. This kit for the Timbren springs did not come with any spacers. I've seen kits that do include the spacers, where it's just a little bit like rubber disc that goes on top of this. I'm not sure why this one didn't include those. Maybe it's a different kit that actually includes that. They both come with their hardware. Not very exciting. And here's where the problems begin. If you watch videos online, and you'll see a lot of videos from the E-Trailer company, and they are a very good company with good prices. I bought a lot of stuff from them. But they did a lot of reviews on these SumoSprings, and in the reviews it shows that the mounting bracket is bolted right to the middle of the SumoSpring, and then you have the mount that comes up here, and this is what goes up through the frame, and then the SumoSpring will mount like this. So this is exactly what it needs for a F250 with single rear wheel axle. So if you watch a lot of reviews on these for the F250, and you look at some of the instruction sheets you find online, everything looks great. It bolts like that, just like the factory Johnson bumper. It's centered, and it'll make contact when the truck is overloaded. Well, the problem is on these newer sets, and I've seen a couple reviews on Amazon that reflected this, even in the instructions it shows that you want to mount it offset on this bracket here. So instead of being mounted right in the middle, it looks like this when it's mounted. As you can see, the plate is offset, and it's not even in total contact on the top. Now when you install this on the truck, it looks like this. So you can see the spring is actually not sitting centered on the axle. And I assure you that I followed the exact instructions when installing these, and that's what it looks like. I contacted the company, SumoSprings, with my concerns. They told me, yes, it did not look right, but they couldn't give me any information. They were going to send it to their engineer. Well, I haven't heard anything back from them. So, unfortunately, the SumoSprings, they have a serious problem. They're not meant to fit. After their change here, somewhere they changed the design. They changed this plate, and they changed the way they mount. And what I suspect is that if you have a dual rear wheel or a dually truck, that this is what you need, but it does not fit the single wheel real trucks, even though it's the correct part number. There is no other part number. So the fact that they couldn't even tell me that over the phone is very disappointing. This will not work. No matter which way you turn it, which hole you put it on, it's either offset forward or behind the axle. It just doesn't fit. So, at least not that I could figure out. So if you have any experience with the newer SumoSprings like this, you know, let me know what happened. It did make contact, but you could see it was at the offset angle, and I know that under like severe compression it would put flex on this, and it would snap these bolts, break the mounts. People have even said that that's happened to them. So unfortunately, these are not even going to get a chance to go on my truck, which left this a very simple decision. I have to use the Timbren springs, and it seems like they may work better for my application anyway with the truck camper, because they seem to hold a little bit better, and just the material itself seems to be a little bit better. So the difference with these, their mounting kit does allow for you to mount it offset, and it allows for it to be mounted straight up, which that's the change that SumoSprings needs to make to this that they did not do correctly. So looks like Timbren's paying a little bit better attention to how things actually work. So I'm going to go ahead and install these today. Alright, so the part number for the Timbren springs we're installing is F250 SDG, and it's very easy to install these. Basically, there's a washer down inside of here. We're going to take our bolt, we're going to put a socket, we're going to feed it down through from the bottom, and then the bolt will stick through the top here, and then we will, this is threaded inside of here, so we will bolt the spring to the mount. The mount just goes up in the frame, which I'll show you here in a minute, and then another bolt comes down from the top of the frame, the washer, and bolts to the top of this. And then this bracket secures it against the frame. Should be a very quick install. You really do not even have to jack up the truck, depending on how your truck sits. The most you may have to do is, like what I did here, I just took a little bit of weight off of the suspension. I know it looks pretty shady, but even if this were to come out, the truck would only drop an inch. It's resting on the wheels. You do not need to remove the wheels to do this installation. Alright, so we're going to take our 9/16 bolt and lock washer, and we will put it in our socket like this, long socket. That way we can thread it up to the bottom. Alright, now that we've got them both mounted, once we put them up against the frame, it will look like this when installed. So over here on the driver's side, there's some wiring in the way, but the easiest way is just to drop the nut down from the top first. And we'll take our spring and get it into position, and you want it to look like this. So it's resting on the frame. So you can see it's positioned directly above the stop. Alright, once you get it started, you want to finish tightening it down with a 9/16 wrench. And just make sure it's centered on the frame as you tighten it down. And then when you're all done, you want to let the, if you have your truck jacked up to here like I do, you want to let that out, and you want to check for at least a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches of clearance. If there's more than that, you may need a spacer here. So here's what it'll look like when it's installed on the side. You can see your clearance here. You've got about 1 inch, maybe just a hair less, so it's perfect. Now I'll move on to the other side. So same thing, tighten up the passenger side, and I didn't even jack this side of the vehicle to put it on. Alright, now I'll take it for a drive and see how the ride is. So I just went for a ride, and the unloaded ride is fantastic. It's pretty much just stock. Only on really big potholes did it make contact, and it was smooth. I mean, you could tell just a little bit of a difference, but normal ride height with my truck, there was no contact when driving down the road, so it's basically just stock ride. The next thing we'll have to do is feel how it feels when it's loaded, and we'll check the ride height. Alright, so now is the real test. We're going to lower the truck camper on, but before I do that, I'm going to get some initial measurements here. So, in the front, we're at about 40.5 inches. The rear, it's right at about 40.5 inches also. So, what I'm going to do now is lower the camper down onto the truck, and then we'll see what our suspension's at. Alright, so we've got the weight off. You can see the jacks are off the ground. The full weight of the truck camper is in the back of the truck. We'll remeasure our front. Still at 40.5 on the front. Okay, the rear is down to about 38.5, a little under. So we lost 2 inches in the rear in the squat. So if we look at the bumpers, they are completely touching. the pad, and they're compressed a little bit. So if we go for a ride right now, it should have all the weight of it on there. That will be controlling the suspension. Alright, so we're out for a drive with the Timbren springs in the back. And I have to say, I really like it. You know, it did go down an inch or two in the back with the weight of the camper on it, but out on the road, compared to before it was pretty harsh. You hit a bump, you go around a corner, and it just felt like you were top heavy with all that weight. But now it feels much more stable on the road. When you hit bumps, it's not jarring, it's not bouncy, it's just nice and firm. So it definitely feels like you have a lot more confidence in the feeling going down the road. So I'm very pleased with it. If this video was helpful to you, give me a like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions. See you next time.